upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message to this distinguished gathering. It's so nice of you to give me of your time, and especially God bless and give long, healthy years to my dear friend, Imam Saad Ali. This is a friendly friend, I think many years already, you can say. Thank God. So I pray that God should give me His words, that I may convey His message and sanctify His name. And thank you again, and thank you for allowing me to come. Yeah, thank you. It's a great privilege. It's an honor. And I'm humbled because to be able to come amongst God-fearing people and to have the opportunity to talk one has to be worthy, so I'm humbled. And I hope we'll be able to be successful in sanctifying the Almighty's name. The time, as I have to apologize, it's before my Sabbath, and the Jewish religion is that by sundown, it's like a cutoff time. If I didn't do everything that I have to for the Sabbath, put up the food, do anything with electric, I'm not allowed to. So I have to be back in my hotel room before, a little prior to, so I should be able to finish off what I have to do, light the candles and so forth. So I apologize, but everything is in the hands of God, and everything, and God doesn't need a length of time, doesn't need, we say behei nivra olam, with hey, that's the softest letter of the aleph base of the Hebrew. God created the world, and God created the whole world in 6 days. God doesn't need time, so with God's help, we'll be able to convey the important issue in this short time, enough to give a window. It says that Noah, when he made the teva, he made like that boat or whatever. He made it says he made a light or a window for that teva. It's called teva in Hebrew, the ark. And basically, the rabbis explain also that in other words, it's like the light that shed in. Teva has a double meaning. It means words that the light. If the light shines in, then everything can come out from it. We only need that light, that comprehension to be able to understand. Once you are able to understand something, to comprehend an issue, then you can, of course, expand on it, understand. So with God's help, I hope just to be able to open that light, to be able to comprehend and see what the issue is here. I've been here many times, thank God, before, so I'm sure many of you know the issue and understand, but it's always good. It's always something which is important. As one of my senior rabbis, should have long, happy, and healthy years, Rabbi Beck always says that the rabbis always say, when they speak about how one should better himself, so the book says that you're supposed to repeat it and study it again and study it again. It's nothing new. Telling a person that he should not get angry, that he should all these things, it's nothing new. Yet you have to. That's the human being. You have to constantly study it and repeat it and study it, and that's the way it gets etched into a person's soul. We're human beings, we're made of flesh and blood. Flesh and blood, unfortunately, gets easily swayed. Emotions and different things take over a person. So but if we constantly work on oneself, then we're able to better ourselves. We're able to stand up to the time of a test when it's hard, at a time of hardships. So even though we discussed maybe this issue of this big test in our generation of Zionism, still in all, it's worthy to constantly repeat it, even for the ones who know it. And for the ones who don't know it, it's certainly important that we should discuss this issue. Zionism is an encompassing thing. It's maybe not so much for the Muslim community. I'm sure they didn't fall in love with Zionism, but the American society amongst who we live, unfortunately, sort of accepted it on its face. And people, unfortunately, look at the issue as if there's there's this Muslim communities and everything, and they have a community that they have to live side by side with, and that has distinctly different goals and things, and it's very hard to live with them. But that's what America is. We have to be able to coexist, and the other community is Jews. But really, it's something which is like a bone in one's throat. But in truth, it has nothing. It really is not. That's totally false. because there is, of course, we have a distinction and difference of religion, but on the contrary, there was not a conflict or a problem of coexistence because of our differences in religion. It happens to be that it wasn't that the Muslims had to come to Jewish countries to be able to live, but the Jewish people throughout the history went to Muslim and Arab countries for relief, for a place to live, for a safe haven, for a home, and they were warmly accepted, graciously accepted in the Muslim countries for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they didn't live there hidden, like there was in Spain. There was the concept of Marranos, hidden Jews, that they had to hide their religion in the Christian society. The ones who didn't, they were burnt at the stake because they were Jews. There was the Inquisition, that the Inquisition means exactly what the terminology means, that they inquisitive, they questioned, they took people and they tortured them if they're practicing Jews or not. So so they had to hide the fact if they were Jews. And of course, many Jews ran away from the Inquisition, from the Spanish rule. There was the Crusades, which the Muslim people also suffered at the hands of the Crusades. Muslims and Jews were murdered wholesale in terrible genocide. So basically, the Jewish people went through very, very many hardships throughout their history of 2,000 years since the destruction of King Solomon's temple. And where did they find a home when they tried to leave these countries? In Turkey, in Iran, in all the other countries, Iraq, and Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, all the countries. So the Jewish, and in Palestine, the Jewish people found a home, a place to be able to exist and to practice openly, and to enjoy, to be able to serve the Almighty in an intense and a very Jewish way. They had their synagogues, they had their everything that was required for them, and this was assisted by the governments, by the Islamic governments. This is a fact of history. You can go to these countries and you can see, which maybe unfortunately a lot of these countries had ended some 60, 80 years ago because of Zion, but that was clearly that was because of a change. And what was the single change that caused things to change? It was because of a new item, a new issue called Zionism. But prior to that, when it was pure Judaism, so Jews they were able to thrive and flourish as religious Jews. There was no human rights groups that the governments had to be afraid of. If they would have wanted to, God forbid, massacre the Jews, there was no United Nations, and yet the Jews flourished. Why? Because although we have a distinct difference in religion and serving God, we all believe in one God, we were able to, we had the respect and the friendship of the Muslim countries. Because Judaism is supposed to be one thing and one thing only, to subservience to God and to serve God as we were commanded. And therefore, in the Muslim teaching, they taught that you're supposed to respect and help these people practice their religion. Zionism started around 100-odd years ago, in the 1880s, 1890s, let's say, and they had the big first meeting in 1890 in Switzerland, where they discussed. These were people who were already non-religious Jews. They weren't practicing their religion. They were Jewish because they were born from Jewish mothers, which makes a person that he's required to practice his religion. But they were not, they detested the religion. They were far removed from practicing Jews, and they were looking for a way out. Time doesn't even give me the opportunity now, but there was really, prior to these Zionists, there was like 100 years, a period of a movement called Reform Judaism. They were going to reform, change the Judaism, that they said that we don't have to keep the Torah. We can be Jews and pick and choose what we want. They made a new type of Judaism called Reform Judaism. The ones who didn't accept this were called Orthodox Jews. Now this reform, in order to gain legitimacy, they made a big job of thievery, of stealing. In other words, what they did was, if they would have just gone into a corner and made some type of movement, they wouldn't have been accepted. But what they did it, they flaunted it, they did it in open, in the public. They made their own rabbinate, they ordained people, and they made a big, and in other words, that's the way, it's a policy. Like I gave an example, when somebody doesn't pay his bills, he'll go to jail or whatever. He'll get arrested if he doesn't do this and that, if he does a scandal, if he does some. But if he's a bank, a very big bank, the bigger you are, then you're going to get away with it. Then the government gives you backing and everything's okay. And you're a distinguished person in society because you're very rich and so forth. That's what the Reform did. They became tremendously large. They made their ordination and things, and they made themselves as if there's some legitimate movement. Until today, this is over 200 odd years, they became a majority, unfortunately, of Jews who don't keep the basic 10 Commandments, the basics of the Torah, the Sabbath, the kosher is out of the window. They have nothing. They don't keep any, and yet they consider themselves as representing Judaism. And this movement started 250 years ago, something. Zionism was already grandchildren, mostly, of these people, and they were totally estranged from the Torah, but they didn't like this issue that even though they were trying to run away from God, God didn't let them. And the Jews were still attacked because they're Jews, because God wanted to remind them, you can't run away from me. So what happened was these guys came along with a new plan that they're going to make their homeland. They're going to protect themselves. They didn't want to turn to God because these are rebels and atheists and things like that. But they decided they're going to make their own country. So in other words, they're going to have a new type of a Judaism. Instead of trying to assimilate and drop their religion, which is reform, to reform the Jews, drop the religion, and it's today in America very, very prevalent. It's the majority of Jews are non-religious Jews. But the Zionists came along 100 odd years ago and they said, this is not working. We're still picked on, anti-Semites pick on us. We're going to make a new thing. We're going to make our own state, our own country. We're going to take guns. We're going to have the iron, what is it called, the Iron Dome. We're going to have, they didn't have then at the Iron, they're going to have Uzis, they're going to have Phantom, they're going to make their own country. But what about practicing the religion? You call yourself Jewish. Not that. That's certainly not. So they wanted to make a new Judaism, and they should be respected as a Judaism. And this is called Zion, because Zion means Zion, means the city of David. So they called themselves Zionists, and they came along with this concept of a new Judaism. Instead of assimilating, to go away in a corner, to make themselves a country, a home, and this is what Judaism is about. So they transformed Judaism from religion, from subservience to God, from keeping the commandments of the Torah, everything that God wants of us, to be righteous, to keep the Sabbath, to do kindness, all the laws of the Torah. They're free of all that. They're a democracy, they call themselves, which is also, in and of itself, the word democracy and Zionism is contradictory, because are you a Jewish state, then you're not a democracy. So they have their problems, even in that word democracy is problematic. But they wanted to make themselves a nationalism. So Zionism means transforming the religion Judaism from religion into nationalism. And when they started this movement in the 1890s, throughout Europe where they started, all the rabbinical authorities said, this is blasphemy, it's not Judaism. We put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out, where it's a compilation of all the greatest authorities of the Torah around the world, whether it was in Europe, whether it was in the Middle Eastern countries, whether everybody stood up and said, we're against this Zionist movement. They ostracized them. They were banished from the Jewish communities. This was, because Zionism was clearly contradictory. Judaism is subservience to God. Zionism's concept was nationalism. But they had an audience. They were able to get backing. Why? Because many Jews, first of all, did suffer and they went through trials and tribulations. Many Jews were already Reformed Jews. In other words, they didn't feel obligated to God, so they always took what's more convenient for them. Reformed Judaism till today, they pick and choose. They decided that a child by us, when he's 13, becomes a man and is required to follow all the laws of the Torah. 13 is too young for them, so they make it 16, 17, make a party. They'll eat non-kosher at the party. They'll do it. It's just simply, some type of a ceremony. The Sabbath, they drive to their temples. They don't call it synagogues, to the temples on the Sabbath. That you're not allowed to gay marriage. That's not a problem by them. Anything they want, whatever is convenient. So at the beginning, mind you, at the beginning of Zionism, it happens to be ironically that Reform leaders hated Zionism because they were trying to assimilate into society. They shouldn't be noticed that they're Jewish. And Zionism comes along and they're starting to make waves. So they stood but they saw that it became a popular issue by the constituents, so all of a sudden it became kosher Zionism. So all of a sudden all the Reform temples and everything started backing this movement of making a land. They wanted to make their land, their homeland in Uganda and in different lands, it would be a lush land, a productive land. In those days, it wasn't today that everything is a computer. In those days, it was production from the land, produce and things. So they looked for a lush land. But this was in 1895 in Switzerland. They had this meeting. But then they said, look, we have to have a massive amount of money and backing. So what are we going to tell the people? That we have a plan to make a state? It's not going to ring well. I'm not going to get the backing of the Christians, of the evangelistic Christians. I'm not going to get the backing of a lot of Jews. Some Jews, yes, some Jews, no, but not enough. So they went to Palestine. They come to Palestine and they say, oh, and they put on this facade, the masquerade as religious Jews, and they started using the Star of David, and they say, oh, this is the land that God took from us, that sent us out in exile 2,000 years, and now He's returning it to us, and it's ours, God's giving it to us. Ignoring totally that the Torah, since the destruction of the temple of King Solomon, we were put under oath by God. It's clearly in the books of the prophecies of King Solomon that we're not to return en masse in large numbers. We're not to try to leave exile. We as Jews believe one day God will make a miracle, a metaphysical change, where all humanity will believe in the one God. And I won't have to convince anybody on the street that there's a God. And then all humanity will go up and serve God. But till that day comes, we're forbidden to return en masse, to try to take to the land. Even then, when we're going to return in the future, when God makes this change, this miracle, it will be the will of all humanity. But to go up, pick ourselves up, and go and fight the people and take their land away is base thievery, stealing. It has nothing to do with a godly command. On the contrary, we're forbidden. That's why for 2,000 years, when the Jews went through the Crusades, the Inquisition, and all these different suffering that we went through, the Jews asked the rabbis, hey, sometimes they had rich Jewish communities in Europe in those days in the Middle Ages. And they said, shouldn't we buy a piece of land? Shouldn't we maybe go back to Palestine? They said, no, it's forbidden. It's clear. It's the writings of Maimonides, the Rambam, Maimonides, maybe you've heard. He was in Egypt, a great rabbi. And many of the other rabbis, they all wrote about this. They said, no, God is compassionate. When the time is right, He'll make this miracle happen. Till that day, have patience and serve Him. What are we to do? Our life is to serve God, to bring glory to the Almighty through our daily living by practicing the Torah, by being kind, doing kindness, and so people can say, hey, that's a God-fearing person. That's what we believe. That's what it means, a light unto the nations. If you ever heard the Jews say there should be a light unto the nations. We believe that we were spread out in exile, and God, it was a punishment for us to break our haughtiness because we weren't up to par at the time of King Solomon and everything. That's why we were sent into exile. If you look at the books of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, they all write that we were sent into exile. The Jews were warned by these prophets they will be sent into exile. They were before the destruction of the temple, and they warned the Jews constantly. It's clearly in the books of the prophets that if you're not on the par like you should be on the level of holiness, you will be dispersed amongst the nations. At the same time, the purpose of dispersion amongst the nations, being that God is perfect, was to break our haughtiness. When a person is sent from one country to another, as many of you know, the taste of that, it breaks a person's haughtiness when he's a stranger amongst other people. At the same time, it was supposed to serve a purpose that if ideally the Jew is practicing his religion properly, he's a light unto the nations because he's a God-fearing person, he's doing kindness, and he's teaching other people how to act. That would be the ideal situation. So we have dual purpose of being dispersed amongst the nations. And we were put under oath not to return en masse, not to rebel against the nations, and to be loyal citizens in every country residing. This is a clear decree of God, and we accepted this for 2,000 years, practiced it for 2,000 years, till Zionism came along. If it would have been such a great idea to make a state, we had many opportunities to do it, and it was never done. Why? Because Jews knew it's forbidden for us. It's basic Judaism. Now they came along, the Zionists, who were estranged from Judaism. They weren't looking to practice God's religion. And all of a sudden, these are going to be our saviors. These are the ones who claim in the name of God. People who don't keep the Sabbath, they eat pig, they do everything that God says is forbidden. And they're all of a sudden claiming that there's the representatives of God, the Star of David, and God sent them Ben Gurion and Netanyahu and the Sharon, all these mass murders, that they're the ones who are representing God, and they're taking the Jews, ushering the Jews into the end of exile. All the rabbis, as I said, you guys are hypocrites, you guys are liars. It's false, it's all false. And they had a power that the Jews didn't fall into that trap. Unfortunately, after World War II was a time when before that, between World War I and World War II, the people in Britain were suffering. Because they're an island, Britain, and they were in a position that they were in desperate position. And somebody called Chaim Weizmann helped them. He saved them. He was a scientist, and he made something like dynamite or something, and he helped the Britons a lot. And they promised to repay him. And he said, "I want to be repaid. That you should give the Balfour Declaration. That you should give us permission to make a Jewish state in Palestine." And they agreed to that. So the Jews, although there was a Jewish community living in Palestine, because we were allowed by God, if the nations give us permission, to live in Palestine as individuals, but not as a nation. And so as individuals, there were Jews living there for hundreds of years in total friendship and under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. They were living there. It was not a problem. They babysat each other's children with their Muslim neighbors. They were coexisting because religion was never an issue. Yet, and all of a sudden, the Zionists came from Britain, from Austria, and they came along and they said, "Hey, this is our land." Because the Britain gave them permission after World War I, Britain had gotten control of this land, the British mandate. They said, now it's yours. It's the Zionists who were able to take it. And they took control over the land. But the rabbis stood in opposition. By World War II, the Jews were massacred. And by every massacre, if you know, let's say in USSR, but the first ones who were killed were the rabbis and the leaders. Because that's the way in the Soviet Union, they're always afraid of the leaders, the ones who are going to teach the people what to do. So the first ones who were taken and murdered were the leaders. So the Jews were without leaders almost entirely. The Zionists came with the promise of land, and they said to the Jews, "Hey, you're without a home." People were in camps, in refugee camps throughout Europe, and they turned to them and they said, "Here, we'll give you land. We'll give you land." And they were able to. And they manipulated that other lands didn't take in the Jews after World War II, and they manipulated that the Jews should be taken to Palestine. Still, many Jews were opposed to the Zionism, even from these refugees, but there were many Jews who were entrapped into this Zionist issue. And also the Zionists played on the emotions of the many masses of Jews who were non-religious. And they kept on saying, we're the beginning of God's redemption. So they used cunning, they used force. They forced Jews out of lands. They put bombs in Iraq in synagogues, and they were caught doing this. So they used many ways of getting Jews to go up to Palestine and manipulating that they should back them. Now, I'm not condoning what they did, obviously, and I'm saying, but they used conniving and tricks, playing on emotions to get Jews who are not knowledgeable about the religion to back them, and force where they couldn't. So they created a new type of Judaism, a nationalism that is forbidden for us. We're forbidden to have even 1 inch of Jewish sovereignty. 2,000 years, as I say, we practice this. We didn't make a state. It's forbidden for us. 1 inch. Even if the Palestinian people would bequeath it to us, give it to us as a present, we couldn't. Now, of course, because the Palestinian people were living there and they didn't give it to us, they were driven from their homes. So the whole Torah is commandments that have to do with how we have to serve God with Sabbath, kosher, and a vast part of the Torah is not to kill, not to steal, that one should do kindness and so forth. Zionism breaches all of those issues in every facet. So Zionism is a thousandfold a rebellion against God. In the essence of the concept of making a land, we're not allowed to make a land. And it's built and rooted in blasphemy, because they say, where was God to protect us? They go around saying to the world, you see what happened by World War II? You see where was God when we went through so many trials and tribulations? Where was God by World War II? So they root it in blasphemy, that God is weak, and their Uzi is strong. Their Iron Dome is what's going to protect them. And it's rooted in blasphemy. It's built on rebellion and on disregarding all the commandments of the Torah. And on top of all of that, of the laws that have to do with other human beings, of killing and stealing. In every facet, the way you can turn this Zionism, it's against the religion of Judaism. And our rabbis, I want you to know, in Palestine, I'm in touch with them every single day. I mean, that's a lie. I'm not in touch with them every single day. Almost every single day. I speak to them. I have my colleagues there. but we're all connected. We write. There's people who go out demonstrating, even going to Palestinian hospitals. It's very hard because the Zionists don't let us cross over into even the West Bank. They stop them. But we go, we try, we make demonstrations. We try because we want the world to understand this is not a religious conflict. If it's not a religious conflict meaning between two religions. It is a religious conflict because it's against religion. It's a conflict against religion. Zionism is against godliness. It's against godliness so far that they don't even respect the morals, what we call godliness, that a normal person has. In other words, they'll masquerade in my identity, or like stealing somebody's credit card. That's what they're doing. They're using somebody's identity to further their political cause, their evil plan of having a state. And they don't mind that I'm going to suffer, and that me as a Jew around the world, we are looked at as enemies of people who we are our best friends for so many hundreds of years. Who suffers? When a lot of times, unfortunately, in Arab and Muslim newspapers, I've seen it, they want to show a picture, a cartoon of a Zionist or somebody, taking a Jew, who's pushing their state of Israel. So they'll show a picture of somebody dressed like me, because that's a symbol of a Jew. So in other words, these Zionists, they don't look like a Jew. So who suffers the most? We, as a Jewish people, because we're identified as if we are Zionists, because they've knowingly fused together Judaism with Zionism. So we want the world to know that this is a crime. It's a base evil. It has no feature in it that could give it legitimacy. It's a totally lacking of a legitimate basis that it should be able to exist, the occupation in Palestine. And the Jewish people are the first to tell you that we are standing up against it. The rabbis, as I've said, before they created a state, before they came to Palestine, we have the writings of the rabbis, 130 years, the record of religious. We fought them in Europe. We fought these Zionists. So because we knew who they are. We knew them because we knew them from the streets. We knew these guys are gangsters from the day one, before they even started their movement. And so we stand there, we cry with the people of Palestine, we cry with the people of Gaza and of Al-Quds. Al-Quds, Jews were able to go pray by the Western Wall, where the temple was. The Waqf gave us permission to pray there. All the hundreds of years, Jews prayed. They didn't have a problem. Zionists came and they started making demonstrations. They started making demonstrations that it's our wall. And then, of course, they riled up the masses of Arabs, and they became demonstrations. And the Arabs, unfortunately, didn't know to differentiate between these Jews and these Jews. And they made a massacre in Hebron. And the rabbis in Hebron, we have the letters where they said we were living in total peace till the Zionists came. Now, we're not, of course, condoning the Hebron massacre, but why was there a Hebron massacre? This was in the 1920s. The massacre came purely because the Zionists started coming and agitating against the Arab populace and claiming the wall is theirs, the Al-Aqsa by the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And everything they did was to confuse the issue, to make it like it's a religious conflict. And then they turn to Western world and they say to them, you see, look at these Arabs. They hate everybody who's not a Muslim. They want to kill everybody who's not a Muslim. And the Western world didn't know the Arab Muslim communities because really most people come here are new here. They knew them from the Jewish people who went to the Middle East. And here these Jews are telling them that that's what they are. So it's a terrible nakba, it's a terrible crime. But at the end of the day, there's an Almighty. And Almighty is just, Almighty is compassionate. He will bring an end. In the Torah, that's why they're not successful in 66 years. And the Torah says, why are you rebelling against me? You will not be successful. It will come to an end. That's clear. It will come to an end. Only we pray, and we urge everybody to pray for a speedy and peaceful, God help, dismantlement of the sentence. It should be without any further death and suffering, which they always bring about. And God is capable of doing it. The time doesn't allow, but God, we say, one guy goes on an ocean and he prays to God that the wind should come this way. Another guy's traveling the other way, and he prays to God. And God hears everybody's prayer because God is capable, Almighty. He can do anything. At the same time, so the Almighty can bring a speedy and peaceful end of the state. It will happen. But also we have to stand up, not be intimidated, study more the subject. You have my card, you have our site. Study the issue of Zionism. So you shouldn't be intimidated. You should be able to speak logically to people and say, this is not a religious conflict, and we live together. Write down the history, how we live together with Jews, and Jews have to write this, that we should show people that there's nothing to do with religion. And then and stand up for the people of Gaza, especially today, and the other people, and the Palestinian people, and the people in refugee camps that are spread out throughout. And the repercussions repercussions will be that just like the repercussions of breeding hate and fight in the rest of the Middle East and around the world, if we were able, with God's help, to bring an end to this state of Israel, then we'll be able to bring repercussions of peace and coexistence. So we're able to serve God, and ultimately we pray for the day, and we urge everybody to pray for the day when the Almighty will reveal His glory throughout the world, where all humanity will serve Him in peace. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry I have to go. I have to Sabbath. Okay. Go. Leave some of that. Some of these papers you have there. Okay, let me go. Maybe I have some more papers. I don't remember. I'll come back maybe tomorrow. We'll see. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.